There comes a moment in every person's life when the noise of the world grows silent, when the endless chatter of desires and fears suddenly stops, and in that sacred pause, something deeper awakens. This is the Stoic Awakening, not a dramatic revelation accompanied by thunder and lightning, but a quiet recognition that you have been living as a prisoner to forces beyond your control. It is the profound realization that your emotions, your reactions, your very sense of self has been shaped by external circumstances, other people's opinions, and the relentless pursuit of things that ultimately hold no lasting power over your inner peace. The Stoic Awakening is the moment you choose to step back from the chaos of reactive living and begin the disciplined journey toward true consciousness, a state where reason governs passion, where virtue guides action, and where the soul finds its rightful place as commander of the mind. The ancient Stoics understood that most human beings live in a state of unconscious reactivity, bouncing from one emotional extreme to another like leaves blown by the wind. They recognized that true freedom begins not with the pursuit of external pleasures or the avoidance of external pain, but with the cultivation of emotional detachment, a profound form of mental liberation that allows us to observe our circumstances without being enslaved by them. This detachment is not coldness or indifference, but rather an elevated perspective that sees beyond the immediate drama of daily life to the underlying patterns and principles that govern existence. When Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, he was pointing to this fundamental truth: that our emotional reactions to events are often far more destructive than the events themselves. The awakened Stoic learns to create space between stimulus and response, choosing their reactions with the same care an artist chooses their colors. The discipline of not reacting impulsively becomes a sacred practice for those walking the Stoic path. In a world that rewards immediate gratification and instant responses, the Stoic develops the rare ability to pause, to breathe, to consider before acting. This is not hesitation born of fear, but wisdom born of experience, the understanding that our first impulse is rarely our wisest impulse. Seneca taught that every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end, and this principle applies profoundly to our reactive patterns. Each moment we choose not to react from old conditioning is a moment we create space for something new and more conscious to emerge. The practice of non-reactivity trains the mind to respond from a place of centeredness rather than chaos, from wisdom rather than impulse, from our highest self rather than our wounded ego. As consciousness begins to rise, the awakening Stoic learns to become an observer of their own thoughts rather than being unconsciously swept away by them. This observer consciousness represents a fundamental shift in identity, from being someone who is constantly buffeted by mental and emotional storms to being someone who can watch those storms pass through with equanimity. Epictetus, who understood suffering intimately through his own experience as a slave, taught that we cannot control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond to what happens to us. This teaching points to the profound truth that consciousness itself is our greatest freedom. When we learn to observe our thoughts without immediately believing or acting upon them, we discover that we are not our thoughts. We are the awareness in which thoughts arise and pass away. The path of rising consciousness inevitably requires us to confront and transcend the ego. that collection of fears, desires, and self-images that keeps us trapped in patterns of unconscious reactivity. The Stoics understood that true humility is not self-deprecation, but rather the accurate recognition of our place in the cosmic order, significant enough to matter, but not so significant that the universe revolves around our personal dramas and desires. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself of the impermanence of all things, including his own life and achievements, not to diminish their value, but to maintain perspective on what truly matters. Rising above ego through humility means releasing the exhausting need to defend our self-image, to always be right, to control how others perceive us. In this release, we discover a freedom that the ego-driven life can never provide, the freedom to simply be, without constant performance or protection. The conscious control over anger, pleasure, and fear represents one of the most practical and transformative aspects of Stoic Awakening. These three fundamental emotions drive much of human behavior, often unconsciously, leading us into patterns of reaction that create more suffering than satisfaction. The awakened Stoic does not seek to eliminate these emotions, for they are natural and even useful responses, but rather to develop conscious relationship with them. Anger can inform us about injustice without compelling us to act destructively. Pleasure can be enjoyed without becoming enslaved to its pursuit. Fear can alert us to danger without paralyzing us with anxiety about imagined futures. Seneca wrote that every new beginning comes from courage, and this courage emerges naturally when we develop the ability to feel our emotions fully while choosing our responses consciously. The practice of morning and evening reflection becomes a cornerstone of spiritual development for the rising Stoic. These bookend practices create sacred containers for consciousness to examine itself, to learn from experience, and to set intentions aligned with virtue and wisdom. The morning reflection prepares the mind for the day ahead, reminding us of our commitment to live according to reason and virtue, regardless of what external circumstances may arise. The evening reflection allows us to review the day with honest self-assessment, not for the purpose of self-criticism, but for the cultivation of self-awareness and continuous growth. Marcus Aurelius filled his personal journals with these reflections, creating what would become one of history's most profound guides to conscious living. Through regular reflection, we develop the habit of stepping back from the immediate experience of life to gain perspective on the deeper patterns and lessons available to us. Perhaps nowhere is the Stoic path more transformative than in its approach to adversity and suffering. Where most philosophical systems seek to help us avoid pain, Stoicism teaches us to transform pain into power, to alchemize suffering into wisdom. This is not masochism or the glorification of hardship, but rather the profound recognition that adversity often serves as our greatest teacher if we approach it with the right attitude. Epictetus, speaking from his own experience of physical disability and social oppression, taught that we can choose to see obstacles as opportunities for growth, setbacks as setups for comebacks, and challenges as chances to demonstrate our commitment to virtue. The awakened Stoic understands that while we cannot choose what happens to us, we can always choose what we make it mean and how we allow it to shape us. Living by virtue as a higher purpose elevates the entire Stoic journey from mere personal development to spiritual transformation. The four cardinal virtues, wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, become not just moral guidelines but actual practices for consciousness expansion. Wisdom involves seeing reality clearly, without the distortions of wishful thinking or fearful projection. Justice means acting in harmony with the interconnected nature of all existence, recognizing that what serves the whole ultimately serves the individual. Courage encompasses not just physical bravery, but the moral courage to live according to our deepest values, even when it's difficult or unpopular. Temperance involves the conscious regulation of our desires and impulses in service of our highest good. When virtue becomes our guiding star, every decision becomes an opportunity to align more fully with our awakened nature. The Stoic concept of divine order, whether understood as nature, the logos, or universal reason, provides a cosmic context for personal awakening that transforms individual growth into participation in something far greater than ourselves. Marcus Aurelius frequently reminded himself that he was part of a larger whole, that his individual life was a thread in the vast tapestry of existence. This recognition brings both humility and empowerment. Humility because it puts our personal concerns in proper perspective, and empowerment because it connects us to the infinite intelligence and order that governs all things. The awakened Stoic learns to align their will with this divine order, not through passive resignation, but through active cooperation with the fundamental principles that govern reality. This alignment brings a deep sense of peace and purpose that transcends the ups and downs of personal circumstances. The Stoic path to inner peace, awareness, and transcendence is not a destination, but a way of being in the world. It is the cultivation of a consciousness that remains centered regardless of external conditions, aware without being reactive, engaged without being attached. This transcendence does not mean withdrawing from life, but rather engaging with life from a higher octave of consciousness, one that sees through the illusions that create suffering and responds from wisdom rather than conditioning. Seneca taught that the mind that is anxious about future misfortunes is miserable in the present, pointing to the way that consciousness can be either scattered across time and circumstance or gathered into the eternal now, where peace and power naturally reside. The true rise of a Stoic is indeed not loud but silent, not a revolution that shakes the external world, but an evolution that transforms the internal landscape from which all external action springs. It is the quiet revolution of taking responsibility for our own consciousness, of choosing response over reaction, of aligning with virtue over convenience. The awakened Stoic moves through the world with a different quality of presence, grounded but not heavy, strong but not rigid, peaceful but not passive. They have discovered that the ultimate freedom is not the freedom to do whatever we want, but the freedom to choose who we become in each moment. In a world obsessed with external achievement and recognition, the Stoic Awakening represents a return to the internal mastery that alone provides lasting satisfaction and genuine peace. The journey from unconscious reactivity to conscious response is the journey from slavery to freedom, from chaos to order, from suffering to transcendence. And it begins always with a single moment of choosing awareness over unconsciousness, wisdom over impulse, virtue over convenience.